Hello, today we will open a mysterious case together, a series of chilling crimes that took place in the UK in the 1980s. The murderer was a Jamaican man, and the victims were all women who had close relationships with him. Although he was brought to court twice, he somehow always escaped punishment in an inexplicable way, and each time he was released, he continued to commit crimes, gradually turning into a serial killer. So what prompted him to attack these women so ruthlessly? Is it a pathological desire for control? Or some sort of twisted psychology hidden deep inside? To answer these questions, let's go back in time to October 8, 1981. On October 8, 1981, a Friday morning as dawn was just beginning to appear, most of the residents of a high-rise apartment building in Wolverhampton, England were still asleep and the hallways were quiet and empty. Suddenly, from the 9th floor of the building came loud slapping sounds. The sound grew louder, waking up many people who were sleeping. After a while, the arguing suddenly stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Everyone was standing around trying to see what was happening when the ambulance siren came from afar and stopped, right in front of the building. Curious, people rushed out to the hallway to look down, and the sight, before their eyes left them stunned, a woman lying motionless on the ground. Police quickly arrived at the scene. The victim was identified as 27-year-old Jamaican Yvonne Johnson, a worker at a local slaughterhouse and mother of two. Her family lived on the 9th floor of the building, which was also where the noise had come from earlier. Although she was taken to the emergency room immediately, Yvonne did not survive. Witnessing the sudden death of his wife, the husband appeared extremely distressed. He told the police that he and his wife had a minor argument that morning. The two argued from inside the house to the hallway. His wife became increasingly agitated and unfortunately slipped, and fell from the hallway to the ground. Seeing that, he quickly called 99, the emergency number in the UK, equivalent to 113 114 or 145 in Vietnam, but it was too late. This man's name was Theodore Johnson, also 27 years old. A year ago, he and his wife had moved from Jamaica to Wolverhampton, UK, in search of job opportunities. Due to limited education, both of them could only do manual labor to make a living. His wife used to work at home, and now she worked at an auto repair shop. Their family life was not rich, but it was stable. Johnson cried and told the police everything that had happened. He looked exactly like a poor husband who had just lost his beloved wife. However, a resident living in the apartment building exposed his true colors. The man told police that Yvonne did not fall by accident but was pushed. That morning, this neighbor heard a loud noise on the 9th floor. So he went out to check and witnessed Theodore pushing Yvonne down. Too scared, he rushed back home but could not shake off the feeling of unease. He felt that Yvonne was a strong-willed woman and didn't want the truth to be buried. So he mustered up the courage to tell the truth. Police conducted a thorough inspection of the location where Yvonne had fallen from the 9th floor. The corridor railing was as high as an adult's chest, so the possibility of an accidental fall was very low. Along with the witness testimony, police suspected that Johnson had intentionally bent down to push his wife. Another resident in the building said the family got along well with everyone, especially Yvonne. She was always polite and left a good impression. However, the couple did not seem to be a good match. Theodore had a short and average appearance, while Yvonne was tall and good-looking. So what caused Theodore to kill his wife? Because the building had not yet installed surveillance cameras at that time. The investigation relied heavily on residents' testimonies. Even so, Theodore firmly denied the accusation, insisting that his wife had fallen by accident. Their two young children were asleep in the house at the time of the incident and could not provide any clues. Although there were eyewitnesses who saw Theodore commit the act, he stubbornly denied it. Police arrested him on suspicion of criminal mischief. While in custody, Theodore wrote a letter to a neighbor in the apartment building. In the letter, he claimed that as soon as he brought his brother-in-law to live with them, things started going wrong. He said Yvonne began to scold and abuse him. At first, he chose to be patient, thinking it was just pressure from life making her lose her temper, but over time her behavior got worse. She would often humiliate him and make him feel small. Theodore claimed he couldn't stand it any longer, and arguments escalated into physical fights. Since he was smaller than Yvonne, he was often overpowered. On the day of the incident, they argued again, which turned into a physical struggle. The fight moved from inside the house to the hallway. In a fit of anger, Theodore pushed his wife, causing her to lose her balance and fall over the railing. The neighbor was shocked after receiving the letter and shared it with other residents. Everyone started talking about it. Public opinion was split into two camps. Some people began to sympathize with Theodore, believing that the tragedy was a result of his wife's overbearing behavior. Others believed it was just Theodore's manipulative trick to gain public sympathy and avoid a harsh sentence in court. In fact, before the letter was shared publicly, the police had already seen its contents. They believed that Theodore's actions were orchestrated by his lawyer to create a favorable image of him as a victim. If the jury believed this narrative, his charge could be reduced from murder to manslaughter, a far lighter sentence. 6 months after the incident, Theodore Johnson's trial took place at Stafford Municipal Court. He was charged with murder. At the trial, the prosecutor pointed out that the defendant and his wife had serious problems in their relationship. Theodore had built up resentment and meticulously planned the murder, staging the scene to look like an accidental fall. Witnesses testified that they had seen Theodore push his wife. The prosecutor argued that Theodore's actions were cruel and calculated, and demanded a life sentence. Meanwhile, the defense attorney argued that the victim was deeply dissatisfied with life in the UK and frequently took out her frustrations on Theodore. The defense claimed that Theodore had endured long-term emotional and physical abuse, leading to psychological stress. Eventually, under overwhelming pressure, he lost control. He had no intention of killing his wife, and her death was simply a tragic accident. Then a couple who lived in the building took the stand. They testified that they had never seen Yvonne act violently toward her husband. On the contrary, they said she was a kind and gentle person. They believed that Theodore's claims were completely fabricated to reduce his punishment. Despite the back-and-forth arguments, it was clear that the judge sympathized with the defense. He told Theodore, "You live a simple and honest life. You are not a violent person. You're the father of 2 young children. I believe everything that happened was because you were mistreated by your wife." After deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. The court found Theodore Johnson not guilty of murder but guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to just 3 years in prison. The verdict caused public outrage. Many people thought the sentence was far too lenient. They criticized the judge and jury for being swayed by the defendant's narrative and ignoring the evidence. There were fears that someone like Theodore, if released, would be a danger to society. However, the verdict was finalized and went into effect. Theodore was sent to prison to serve his sentence. His 2 children were placed in a local social protection center. During his time in prison, Theodore was quiet and reserved. He never caused trouble or spoke about the case. He ignored all the criticism from outside. 3 years later, he was released and returned to normal life. Most people released from prison struggled to find jobs and face discrimination. But Theodore was an exception. He was skilled at gaining people's trust and quickly found work at an auto body shop in Wolverhampton. At first, he worked very hard and seemed like a changed man. However, a few years later, when he was 38 years old, Theodore met a woman at a bar who happened to share the same name as his late wife, Yvonne Bennett. Whether this coincidence triggered something inside him or not remains unclear, but Theodore pursued Yvonne Bennett intensely. They quickly became lovers and moved to live together, near Filbury Park in North London. They had a daughter together and for a while lived a seemingly peaceful life. To everyone around them, Theodore appeared to be a hard-working and caring man. But this peaceful facade didn't last long. Yvonne began having an affair, and when Theodore found out, he became furious. He questioned her constantly, displayed jealous rages, and became increasingly violent. Unable to tolerate Theodore's temper, Yvonne decided to break up with him and moved out, taking their daughter with her. This deeply unsettled Theodore. He started following Yvonne day and night, refusing to accept the breakup. He would lurk outside her new home, stalk her movements, and even use violence to force her to return to him. Frightened by Theodore's obsessive and threatening behavior, Yvonne reported him to the police several times. Then one day when Yvonne wasn't home, Theodore broke into her house and hid in the wardrobe. When she returned, he suddenly jumped out and stabbed her in the neck with a knife, nearly killing her. Fortunately, the screams of their daughter brought Theodore back to his senses. he stopped short of killing her completely. Theodore was arrested and questioned by police after the incident. However, because Yvonne had survived and he hadn't caused fatal harm, police released him after interrogation. Following this incident, Yvonne became more cautious. She locked her doors more carefully, always fearing that Theodore might break in again. But even with those precautions, she couldn't prevent what was to come. One evening in 1993, Theodore showed up at Yvonne's house with a box of chocolates. He rang the doorbell and spoke in a soft tone, saying he wanted to make peace and see their daughter. Touched by his unusual gentleness, Yvonne opened the door. But the moment was short-lived. They hadn't talked for long before another argument broke out. Theodore accused her of being cold, distant, and unfair to him. As tempers flared, Theodore lost control again. In a fit of rage, he pulled off his belt and strangled Yvonne until she stopped breathing. After killing her, he found their daughter still sleeping peacefully in the bedroom, looking at her innocent face. He was suddenly overcome by remorse, a wave of despair crashing over him. He didn't know what to do. Eventually, he walked to a public phone booth on the street and called the police. When they arrived, they found Theodore attempting to hang himself from a tree in front of Yvonne's house. The police rushed to the scene and managed to stop Theodore in time. He was not seriously injured. As soon as they confronted him, Theodore confessed to the crime, admitting that he had killed Yvonne Bennett in a moment of uncontrollable rage. He said he didn't know what else to do, and that's why he attempted to end his own life. This was now the second time Theodore had taken a woman's life. But his confession raised suspicions among the police. When they arrived, Theodore had staged his suicide attempt in a highly visible location right in front of the house, using a rope and a method that appeared slow and ineffective, as if it were an act. This behavior was reminiscent of the letter he had written 12 years earlier to his neighbor after the death of his wife, Yvonne Johnson. Both instances seemed like attempts to manipulate others into feeling sympathy for him. The police conducted a thorough investigation and arrested Theodore on charges of murder. News of his repeated crime quickly spread through the media, shocking the public. Many people now saw Theodore as an extremely dangerous man. The first time he had killed, he narrowly escaped a life sentence. Now, after serving his time and being given a second chance, he had committed another murder. People feared that if he wasn't punished severely this time, there would be more victims in the future. After his arrest, Theodore remained unusually calm. No matter what the police asked him, he answered honestly, without resistance or emotional outburst. The authorities gathered enough evidence to charge him. It seemed certain he would now face the full weight of the law. But then, right before the trial was set to begin, an unexpected development shocked everyone. Theodore's lawyer submitted a psychiatric evaluation report to the court. The report concluded that Theodore suffered from depression and a personality disorder. It stated that when he lost control of his emotions, he could behave irrationally and beyond his ability to restrain himself. This diagnosis changed everything. Once again, Theodore avoided the harshest punishment. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished mental responsibility. Instead of prison, he was sent to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. Medical staff who evaluated him described him as highly controlling. When he was rejected, he felt rage and despair, emotions that led him to violence. His actions after each crime were not out of genuine remorse, but calculated attempts to control the situation and escape legal consequences. He understood the justice system well and knew how to exploit it. Even though he had a diagnosed mental illness, Theodore's manipulative and cunning nature became increasingly clear. In 1994, while undergoing treatment, Theodore appeared cooperative and gradually gained the trust of the hospital staff. The hospital began allowing Theodore to go outside for short periods each day, provided he was accompanied by medical staff. A year later, he was granted permission to go out alone. During one of these outings, he participated in a 2-day furniture repair course arranged by the hospital, in hopes of helping him reintegrate into society. While attending the course, he met a 51-year-old woman named Angela Best. Angela was a single mother of 4 children. Theodore, then 41 years old, quickly fell in love with her and pursued her with great intensity. Not long after, the two began dating. However, Theodore never told Angela about his past crimes, nor did he inform the hospital or the authorities supervising his release that he was in a new romantic relationship. The two carried on their relationship in secret for nearly 2 years. In 1997, the Mental Health Board conducted a review of Theodore's condition. He performed exceptionally well during the evaluation. He showed no signs of instability and behaved like a completely normal individual. The final conclusion was that Theodore was now mentally stable and fit to return to normal life. However, this release came with a condition. He had to report any close relationships or major life changes to the supervising agency. Theodore agreed to this condition, but he did not comply with it. He never disclosed his relationship with Angela. Instead, he and Angela moved in together and began living a seemingly ordinary life. They found a new place to live and both found work. From the outside, everything appeared normal. Supervisory staff made periodic visits to ensure Theodore wasn't engaging in any behavior that could pose a danger to others, particularly women. But since the staff always informed him ahead of time before their visits, Theodore had plenty of opportunity to hide Angela's presence. Whenever staff came to inspect the house, Theodore would ask Angela and her 4 children to leave temporarily. He even hid all of their belongings, including clothes and personal items, to avoid detection. Angela became suspicious about this behavior, but Theodore always gave convincing excuses and she believed him. During one inspection, staff noticed a carved wooden ornament on the fireplace mantel, the kind typically favored by women. When asked about it, Theodore lied and said he picked it up at a workshop because he liked the way it looked. The staff did not suspect anything and simply noted it in their report. In reality, there was also a woman's nightgown, with a newspaper print hanging in the house during that visit. But no one noticed it. Theodore breathed a sigh of relief. Time passed. By 2016, Theodore and Angela had been living together for 21 years. During that time, Theodore had committed no known crimes. The supervisory agency gradually loosened its control over him, and home visits became less frequent. Theodore and Angela continued to live what appeared to be a peaceful life. It seemed that the ghost of his past had finally faded. But no one expected that behind this calm facade, a storm was quietly forming. A new tragedy was on the horizon. One day in September 2016, while cleaning the house, Angela discovered a hidden letter. Curious, she opened and read it, and was horrified by its contents. It was a confession letter, in which Theodore detailed how he had killed his ex-wife, Yvonne Johnson, and his ex-girlfriend, Yvonne Bennett. Angela was devastated. The man she had lived with for over 20 years had been hiding a dark, murderous past. What terrified her even more was how well he had concealed it, never once revealing a single flaw or sign of guilt. Shocked and furious, Angela immediately confronted Theodore. She demanded to know why he had hidden his past and condemned him for the horrific acts he had committed against 2 women who had once loved him. Theodore was cold and dismissive. He acted as if Angela was overreacting, saying it had all happened many years ago and that he had already been punished for it. To him, there was no reason to bring it up again, but Angela could not accept that. Despite the years they had spent together, she could no longer live with a man who had killed 2 women and lied to her about it. Terrified and unable to trust him, she made the decision to leave him. Theodore was furious when he heard this. He completely disagreed with her decision and tried to change her mind, but Angela was determined. Nothing he said could make her stay. Angela moved out of their home. By then, her 4 children were adults and living independently, so she moved alone. She relocated to Goodmayes Green, around 5 kilometers away. Not long after, Angela began dating a new man. This news devastated Theodore. He was heartbroken and increasingly unstable. 3 months after their breakup, a psychiatrist visited Theodore as part of a routine check-in. During the conversation, the doctor didn't notice anything unusual. On the outside, Theodore appeared calm and normal, but inside he was sinking into despair. He felt betrayed and abandoned, and as unbeknownst to anyone, he began hatching a dangerous plan. Despite their breakup, Theodore and Angela continued to stay in occasional contact. About a week after the psychiatrist's visit, Theodore called Angela and lied, claiming he needed help renewing his passport, and asked her to contact the Jamaican embassy for him. Angela, unaware of his intentions, agreed to help. That morning, she went to see Theodore, alone. As soon as they met, he began verbally attacking her. He mocked her for moving on so quickly and accused her of cheating and betrayal. Angela, not wanting to escalate things, tried to leave. But at that moment, Theodore grabbed her. As Angela turned to leave, Theodore suddenly grabbed her and tied her up with a rope. Realizing the danger she was in, Angela began to scream. But Theodore quickly stuffed something into her mouth to muffle the sound. Then he picked up an iron rod and struck her forcefully on the head, knocking her unconscious. But he wasn't finished. In a final act of brutality, Theodore used a bathrobe belt to strangle Angela to death. After committing the murder, he stayed in the house for several hours, sitting with Angela's lifeless body. Around 3 p.m., he left the house, drove to the train station, and purchased a random ticket. He then made his way to the platform. As the train approached, Theodore suddenly jumped onto the tracks, attempting to end his own life. But his attempt failed. Station staff acted quickly, pulling him off the tracks and rushing him to the emergency room. Theodore survived, but with devastating consequences. He lost both of his arms. While Theodore was being treated at the hospital, the police were alerted. They went to his home to investigate and discovered a gruesome scene. Angela's body was found in the living room, her head showing severe trauma, and an iron chamber pot lay nearby, covered in blood. The crime scene was horrific, leaving no doubt about who was responsible. Theodore had once again used a familiar tactic, committing violence, then attempting suicide to avoid accountability. But the public wasn't fooled. Once again, Theodore Johnson became the focus of national outrage. People were furious that he had been given freedom after 2 prior deaths and now had taken yet another life. Many questioned the decisions of the courts and psychiatric institutions that had allowed him to walk free for so many years. During police interrogation, Theodore confessed to everything. He admitted that he and Angela had been together since 1995, but he had kept the relationship hidden from authorities the entire time. Angela, too, had never known about his criminal history. He believed he had kept everything buried, until Angela found the confession letter. When she broke up with him, Theodore said he became enraged. Despite having been with her for more than 20 years, he couldn't accept her leaving. He killed her in a fit of anger and then, he claimed, was overwhelmed by remorse and attempted suicide. Theodore said that he believed life had lost all meaning. His attempt to end his life, however, was unsuccessful, and instead of death, he was left permanently disabled. He concluded that perhaps this was God's punishment for all that he had done. Police also discovered the confession letter at Theodore's home. In it, he had written detailed descriptions of how he murdered both Yvonne Bennett and Yvonne Johnson. He also revealed the truth. Yvonne Johnson did not fall by accident. He had hit her with a vase, dragged her into the hallway, and intentionally pushed her off the 9th floor. Theodore's confession revealed that he was a deeply controlling man. He wanted full control over his partner's relationships, even their clothing choices. He and his wife, Yvonne Johnson, often argued about such matters. On the day of her death, Yvonne had been getting ready to go to church and had picked out a dress to wear. Theodore, however, disapproved of the outfit, calling it inappropriate. Their disagreement escalated into a violent confrontation. In a rage, Theodore picked up a vase and struck Yvonne on the head. The blow left her stunned and unable to resist. Taking advantage of her weakened state, Theodore dragged her into the hallway and pushed her over the railing from the 9th floor. The crime had been staged as an accident, but now after decades, the truth had finally been exposed. Theodore's crimes had spanned over 35 years. From 1981 to 2016, all of his victims had been women in close relationships with him, women who had trusted and loved him. Why had he followed such a dark and violent path? It may all trace back to his childhood experiences. Theodore Johnson was born into a large, poor family in Jamaica. He was one of 11 children, the only boy. His parents were banana farmers, barely making a living. The family lived in a dilapidated house on a banana plantation, in harsh conditions. Due to the family's financial struggles, his parents constantly argued over trivial matters. The home environment was filled with tension and conflict. As a child, Theodore would often hide in a corner, silently witnessing the fights, too afraid to intervene. This planted a seed of fear and insecurity in his young mind, especially regarding close relationships. At times, to reduce household expenses, Theodore's father would send him to live with relatives. This instability only made things worse. He never felt truly safe or secure, and he grew up desperately clinging to anything that made him feel in control. His small size and quiet demeanor made him an easy target. He was often bullied by his siblings, who would steal his food and blame him for things he didn't do. These experiences made Theodore deeply self-conscious. He craved recognition, control, and respect. As an adult, Theodore had several relationships, but none lasted. He was obsessed with controlling his partners, a way to compensate for his lack of power in childhood. Whenever a woman tried to escape his control, he felt threatened, abandoned, and overwhelmed. This often led to possessive behavior and ultimately extreme violence. Angela's case was eventually brought to Central Criminal Court. Theodore Johnson was charged with murder. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was filled with people, all waiting to see what punishment would finally befall this serial killer. Theodore sat in his wheelchair expressionless, while the prosecutor laid out the full extent of his brutal crimes. This time, there would be no escape for Theodore Johnson. No one believed his excuses anymore, not the court, not the public, not even the legal professionals present. The prosecutor detailed his long history of abuse and murder, emphasizing the cold-blooded nature of his actions. Angela's children took the stand and delivered emotional statements. "Our mother was a very kind person," they said. "She was always willing to help others. Unfortunately, that kindness is what led to her death." The courtroom was silent as the jury deliberated. After reviewing the evidence, the court returned with a final verdict. Theodore Johnson was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to 26 years in prison, but even this sentence was considered by many to be too lenient. The prosecution appealed, arguing that the severity and pattern of Theodore's crimes warranted a harsher punishment. The appeal was successful. His sentence was increased by an additional 9 years, bringing the total to 35 years in prison. By then, Theodore was 62 years old, which meant he would not be eligible for release until he was at least 92. There were reports from within the prison that Theodore had become a target. Other inmates reportedly bullied him, spilled food on him intentionally, and stole his personal items. Some even physically assaulted him. Eventually, the prison authorities were forced to place him in solitary confinement for his own safety. He spent the remainder of his life there, cut off from everyone. 8 years later, Theodore Johnson died in prison from health complications. He was 70 years old. His death marked the end of a dark and painful chapter, but the trauma he left behind remained. He had taken the lives of 3 women who had loved him, trusted him, and welcomed him into their lives. His actions left behind motherless children, families filled with grief and wounds that may never fully heal. The case of Theodore Johnson is not only a personal tragedy but also a serious warning to society. It reminds us of the dangers of possessiveness, manipulation, and domestic violence. It also raises troubling questions about the criminal justice system, especially regarding the release and supervision of dangerous individuals. How many chances should someone be given before society recognizes them as a real threat? Was a 30-year sentence enough to pay for the suffering he caused? That's a question only society can answer. More importantly, this story reminds us of the need to speak up against abuse, to protect not only ourselves but those around us. Never stay silent. Seek help, because your life and the lives of your loved ones are precious and irreplaceable.